Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video we're going to look at when the Beatles stopped writing love songs, and why. At the start of their career, almost everything the Beatles wrote was about love. Just look at the titles. Nearly every one is about you or me. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy wants girl back again. Simple, direct, and incredibly effective. But by early 1966, things had begun to change. And that's quite a shift, because for the first time, their new single isn't about love or relationships. So how did they get from those early love songs to something like that? And just as importantly, why? They didn't stop writing love songs, but at some point, they stopped being the starting point. And that shift tells us a lot about how the Beatles were changing, not just as songwriters, but as artists. So in this video, I want to try and pin down when that change really takes place, and what was behind it. If you go back to the beginning of the Beatles, love songs aren't just a big part of what they're doing, it's pretty much all they're doing.
Love me do.
Their first single couldn't be more straightforward, and that more or less sets the tone for what follows. From 1962 to 1965, they're writing songs to connect instantly with an audience, whether that's live on the radio or on record. And for that, love is the perfect subject. The best songs from this era are built around simple ideas and simple emotions, delivered with energy and conviction, and that's why they work. Even as the songwriting matures, the subject matter stays largely the same. Whether it's excitement, jealousy, longing, or heartbreak, it all comes back to relationships, and that's what gives them such universal appeal. But the more they succeed, the more they start to push against that framework, and by 1965, you can hear that it's no longer enough. By the time you get to Rubber Soul, something has clearly shifted. The songs are often about relationships, but they don't quite feel the same anymore. They're less direct, less obvious. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface. Songs like Paul's We Can Work It Out and You Won't See Me are still about relationships, but now they're dealing with conflict and frustration in a way earlier songs didn't. It's no longer boy meets girl, it's something more complicated than that. But it's John Lennon's writing that really shows where things are heading, and nowhere is that clearer than on In My Life. On the face of it, you could still call it a love song, but the relationship isn't really the point. Instead, it's about memory. It's about looking back at places and people and time passing, with love as just one part of that. And that's a very different perspective. It's one of the first times Lennon sounds like he's looking back on his life, rather than simply living through it. Earlier songs are about what's happening right now. This is reflective, someone stepping back and taking stock. And once you start writing like that, it opens the door to all sorts of other subjects. You can hear the same thing elsewhere on the album. The writing feels more observational, more considered. It's no longer just reacting to a situation, it's exploring it. So Rubber Soul doesn't mark the end of love songs, but it does feel like the point where they stop being the whole story altogether. By the time you reach Revolver, the balance has clearly shifted. What's interesting is that the love song hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer the centre of what the Beatles are doing. Take Here, There and Everywhere. It's one of the most beautiful love songs they ever recorded, and one of Paul's own favourites. It's very intimate and completely focused on a relationship, but around it, everything else has changed. John's songs, though, are moving in a completely different direction. They build on what he started with Nowhere Man, but go further, more inward-looking, and less about relationships. Instead, they're more about perception and experience. And George, meanwhile, is stepping outside that framework altogether. Songs like Love You Too aren't about romantic love at all. They're drawing on completely different ideas and influences. So within a single album, you can hear three very different approaches. And that's really the key point. The Beatles suddenly didn't stop writing love songs, they stopped writing the same kind of song. So if the change is clear by 1966, the next question is why? Because this isn't just something that happens on its own. There are a few different things all coming together at the same time. The first is practical. Up to this point, the Beatles had been writing songs with live performance in mind. They're playing to thousands of people, often in difficult conditions. And in many cases, the audience can barely hear what's going on anyway. So the songs have to be simple and come across immediately, which is where love songs fit in so well. But by 1966, that's coming to an end. They stopped touring, and suddenly they're no longer writing with that kind of audience in mind. Instead, they're writing more for themselves and for the studio, and that changes things completely. At the same time, the music around them is starting to change. Songs like Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds and Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan are showing that pop music doesn't have to be built around love at all. These are songs about ideas and experience. And even closer to home, the Rolling Stones are having hits with songs like Satisfaction, which are driven more by attitude and frustration than romance. So things are starting to shift. Love isn't the obvious subject anymore, it's just one of many, and that starts to have an impact. It doesn't mean the Beatles are copying these artists, but it does expand the possibilities of what a song can be. Suddenly, you can write about something other than love and still have a hit record. And that's quite a shift, because moving away from that familiar love song formula was a big step, and not without risk. There's also a simpler explanation. By the mid-60s, they've already written dozens of love songs. They've explored that territory from every angle, and that starts to become limiting, and you can hear that restlessness in the writing. And then there's another factor which is hard to ignore. Like many artists of the time, the Beatles are experimenting with drugs. And that does start to change the way they think. The songs start to reflect a different way of thinking. And as that happens, the traditional love song becomes less central. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer defines what they're doing. And sometimes you can see this in small details. Paul recalled a comment from his Aunt Lil, asking why he always wrote songs about love, and whether he could try writing about something else for a change. Whether she meant it seriously or not, it clearly stuck. Because not long after, he arrived at the studio with an idea for a song written as a letter from someone trying to be a paperback writer. It's a small detail, but it says something important. They were starting to think differently about what a song could be. What's interesting is that love songs don't disappear completely. By the time you get to the Beatles' White Album, they start to reappear, but they don't quite feel the same.
Who knows how long I've loved you?
Take I Will. It's very simple, almost like a throwback to an earlier style. But then you have Julia, which is something else entirely. It's deeply personal and not a conventional love song at all. It's not written to connect with an audience in the same immediate way as those early songs. It feels much more reflective, and that's really the difference. By this stage, love songs are no longer the starting point. They're not what the Beatles automatically fall back on. When they write about love, it's because they choose to, and when they do, it often comes from a more individual place. By this point, something else is happening as well, particularly in John's writing. Because after meeting Yoko, he does begin to return to writing about love, but again, it doesn't sound like it used to. Earlier love songs were written to connect with an audience. They were shaped, structured, and often quite controlled. Now, they're much more direct and much less guarded.
Don't let me down.
Songs like Don't Let Me Down aren't really constructed in the same way as those early Beatles love songs. They feel more like expressions than compositions. Love comes back into the writing, but by now it's no longer just a subject. It's something much more direct than that. So when you look back at the whole picture, it becomes clear. At the beginning, love songs are at the foundation of everything they do. It's how they connect with their audience and what the music is built around. Then gradually, that begins to change. The perspective shifts and the writing becomes more reflective, and the range expands. And by 1966, Love is no longer at the centre of their songwriting. It's still there, but it's no longer the main focus. And yet, by the very end, they come back to the idea of love, but in a very different way. At the start, their first single was Love Me Do, which couldn't be more direct in what it was asking for. But by the time you get to the end of their recording career, something has clearly changed. Because on Abbey Road, the last words they leave us with are,
And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
I'll be back next weekend with the students as they listen to Rubber Soul for the first time. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.
Half of what I say is meaningless.